A stranger, silent and pale, stops a world champion with a whisper. What he sees on the board, no one else can. This is Chess by Stefan Zweig. This is Chapter 1. If you're ready, let the game begin. The big liner, due to sail from New York to Buenos Aires at midnight, was filled with the activity and bustle incident to the last hour. Visitors, who had come to see their friends off, pressed hither and thither. Page boys, with caps smartly cocked, slithered through the public rooms, shouting names snappily. Baggage, parcels, and flowers were being hauled about. Inquisitive children ran up and down companionways, while the deck orchestra provided a persistent accompaniment. I stood, talking to an acquaintance on the promenade deck, somewhat apart from the hubbub, when 2 or 3 flashlights sprayed sharply near us, evidently for press photos of some prominent passenger at a last-minute interview. My friend looked in that direction and smiled. "You have a queer bird on board, that Czentovic." And as my face must have revealed that the statement meant nothing to me, he added, by way of explanation, "Mirko Czentovic, the world chess champion. He has just finished off the USA in a coast-to-coast exhibition tour and is on his way to capture Argentina." This served to recall not only the name of the young world champion, but also a few details relating to his rocket-like career. My friend, a more observant newspaper reader than I, was able to eke them out with a string of anecdotes. At a single stroke, about a year ago, Czentovic had aligned himself with the solidest elder statesmen of the art of chess, such as Alekhine, Capablanca, Tartakover, Lasker, Bogoljubov. Not since the appearance of the 9-year-old prodigy Reshevsky in New York in 1922 had a newcomer crashed into the famed guild to the accompaniment of such widespread interest. It seems that Czentovic's intellectual equipment, at the beginning, gave small promise of so brilliant a career. The secret soon seeped through that in his private capacity, this champion wasn't able to write a single sentence in any language without misspelling a word, and that, as one of his vexed colleagues, wrathfully sarcastic, put it, he enjoys equal ignorance in every field of culture. His father, a poverty-stricken Yugoslavian boatman on the Danube, had been run down in his tiny vessel one night by a grain steamer. The orphaned boy, then 12, was taken in charge by the pastor of their obscure village, out of pity. The good man did his level best to instill into the indolent, slow-speaking, low-browed child at home what he seemed unable to grasp in the village school. But all efforts proved vain. Mirko stared blankly at the writing exercise, just as if the strokes had not already been explained 100 times. His lumbering brain lacked every power to grasp even the simplest subjects. At 14, he still counted with his fingers, and it was only by dint of great strain that he could read, in a book or newspaper. Yet none could say that Mirko was unwilling or disobedient. Whatever he was told to do, he did. Fetched water, split wood, worked in the field, washed up the kitchen, and he could be relied upon to execute, even if with exasperating slowness, every service that was demanded. But what grieved the kindly pastor most about the blockhead was his total lack of cooperation. He performed no deed unless specially directed, asked no questions, never played with other lads, and sought no occupation of his own accord. After Mirko had concluded his work about the house, he would sit idly, with that empty stare one sees with grazing sheep, without participating in the slightest in what might be going on. Of an evening, while the pastor sucked at his long peasant pipe and played his customary 3 games of chess, with the police sergeant, the fair-haired dull-wit, squatted silent alongside them, staring from under his heavy lids, seemingly sleepy and indifferent, at the checkered board. One winter evening, while the two men were absorbed in their daily game, a rapid crescendo of bells gave notice of a quickly approaching sleigh. A peasant, his cap covered with snow, stamped in hastily to tell the pastor that his mother lay dying and to ask his immediate attendance in the hope that there was still time to administer extreme unction. The priest accompanied him at once. The police sergeant, who had not yet finished his beer, lighted a fresh pipe preparatory to leaving, and was about to draw on his heavy sheepskin boots when he noticed how immovably Mirko's gaze was fastened on the board, with its interrupted game. "Well, do you want to finish it?" he said jocularly, fully convinced that the sleepyhead had no notion of how to move a single piece. The boy looked up shyly, nodded assent, and took the pastor's place. After 14 moves, the sergeant was beaten, and he had to concede that his defeat was in no wise attributable to avoidable carelessness. The second game resulted similarly. "Balaam's ass!" cried the astounded pastor upon his return, explaining to the policeman, a lesser expert in the Bible, that 2,000 years ago there had been a like miracle of a dumb being suddenly endowed with the speech of wisdom. The late hour notwithstanding, the good man could not forego challenging his half-illiterate helper to a contest. Mirko beat him too with ease. He played toughly, slowly, deliberately, never once raising his bowed, broad brow from the board. But he played with irrefutable certainty, and in the days that followed, neither the priest nor the policeman were able to win a single game. The priest, best able to assess his ward's various shortcomings, now became curious as to the manner in which this one-sided singular gift would resist a severer test. After Mirko had been made somewhat presentable by the efforts of the village barber, he drove him in his sleigh to the nearby town, where he knew that many chess players, a cut above him in ability, he was aware from experience, were always to be found in the cafe on the main square. The pastor's entrance, as he steered the straw-haired, red-cheeked 15-year-old before him, created no small stir in the circle. The boy, in his sheepskin jacket, woolen side-in, and high boots, eyes shyly downcast, stood aside until summoned to a chess table. Mirko lost the first encounter because his master had never employed the Sicilian defense. The next game, with the best player of the lot, resulted in a draw, but in the third game, and the fourth, and all that came after, he slew them one after the other. It so happens that little provincial towns of Yugoslavia are seldom the theater of exciting events. Consequently, this first appearance of the peasant champion before the assembled worthies became no less than a sensation. It was unanimously decided to keep the boy in town until the next day, for a special gathering of the chess club, and in particular, for the benefit of Count Simczyk of the castle, a chess fanatic. The priest, who now regarded his ward with quite a new pride, but whose joy of discovery was subordinate to the sense of duty which called him home to his Sunday service, consented to leave him for further tests. The chess group put young Czentovic up at the local hotel, where he saw a water closet for the first time in his life. The chess room was crowded to capacity on Sunday afternoon. Mirko faced the board, immobile, for 4 hours, spoke no word, and never looked up. One player after another fell before him. Finally, a multiple game was proposed. It took a while before they could make clear to the novice that he had to play against several contestants at one and the same time. No sooner had Mirko grasped the procedure than he adapted himself to it and trod slowly with heavy creaking shoes from table to table, eventually winning 7 of the 8 games. Grave consultations now took place. True, strictly speaking, the new champion was not of the town, yet the innate national pride had received a lively fillip. Here was a chance, at last, for this town, so small that its existence was hardly suspected, to put itself on the map by sending a great man into the world. A vaudeville agent named Collar, who supplied the local garrison cabaret with talent, offered to obtain professional training for the youth from a Viennese expert whom he knew, and to see him through for a year if the deficit were made good. Count Simsich, who in his 60 years of daily chess had never encountered so remarkable an antagonist, signed the guarantee promptly. That day marked the opening of the astonishing career of the Danube boatman's son. It took only 6 months for Mirko to master every secret of chess technique, though with one odd limitation, which later became apparent to the votaries of the game and caused many a sneer. He never was able to memorize a single game, or, to use the professional term, to play blind. He lacked completely the ability to conceive the board in the limitless space of the imagination. He had to have the field of 64 black and white squares and the 32 pieces tangibly before him. Even when he had attained international fame, he carried a folding pocket board with him in order to be able to reconstruct a game or work on a problem by visual means. This defect, in itself not important, betrayed a want of imaginative power and provoked animated discussions among chess enthusiasts, similar to those in musical circles, when it discovers that an outstanding virtuoso or conductor is unable to play or direct without a score. This singularity, however, was no obstacle to Mirko's stupendous rise. At 17, he already possessed a dozen prizes. At 18, he won the Hungarian mastery. And finally, at 20, the championship of the world. The boldest experts, every one of them immeasurably his superior in brains, imagination, and audacity, fell before his tough, cold logic, as did Napoleon before the clumsy Kutuzov, and Hannibal before Fabius Cunctator, of whom Livy records that his traits of phlegm and imbecility were already conspicuous in his childhood. Thus it occurred that the illustrious gallery of chess masters, which included eminent representatives of widely varied intellectual fields, philosophers, mathematicians, constructive, imaginative, and often creative talents, was invaded by a complete outsider, a heavy, taciturn peasant, from whom not even the cunningest journalists were ever able to extract a word that would help to make a story. Yet, however, he may have deprived the newspapers of polished phrases. Substitutes in the way of anecdotes about his person were numerous. For, inescapably, the moment he arose from the board at which he was the incomparable master, Czentovic became a grotesque and almost comic figure. In spite of his correct dress, his fashionable cravat with its 2 ostentatious pearl tie-pin, and his carefully manicured nails, he remained in manners and behavior the narrow-minded lout who was accustomed to sweeping out the priest's kitchen. He utilized his gift and his fame to squeeze out all the money they would yield, displaying petty and often vulgar greed, always with a shameless clumsiness that aroused his professional colleagues' ridicule and anger. He traveled from town to town, stopped at the cheapest hotels, played for any club that would pay his fee, sold the advertising rights in his portrait to a soap manufacturer, and, oblivious of his competitors' scorn, they being aware that he hardly knew how to write, attached his name to a philosophy of chess that had been written by a hungry Galician student for a business-minded publisher. As with all leathery dispositions, he was wanting in any appreciation of the ludicrous. From the time he became champion, he regarded himself as the most important man in the world. And the consciousness of having beaten all those clever, intellectual, brilliant speakers and writers in their own field, and of earning more than they, transformed his early unsureness into a cold and awkwardly flaunted pride. And how can one expect that such rapid fame should fail to befuddle so empty a head, concluded my friend, who had just advanced those classic examples of Czentovic's childish lust for rank. Why shouldn't a 21-year-old lad from the Banat be afflicted with a frenzy of vanity if suddenly, by merely shoving figures around on a wooden board, he can earn more in a week than his whole village does in a year by chopping down trees under the bitterest conditions? Besides, isn't it damned easy to take yourself for a great man if you're not burdened with the slightest suspicion that a Rembrandt, a Beethoven, a Dante, a Napoleon ever even existed? There's just one thing in that immured brain of his: the knowledge that he hasn't lost a game of chess for months. And as he happens not to dream that the world holds other values than chess and money, he has every reason to be infatuated with himself. The information communicated by my friend could not fail to excite my special curiosity. I have always been fascinated by all types of monomania, by persons wrapped up in a single idea. For the stricter the limits a man sets for himself, the more clearly he approaches the eternal. Just such seemingly world-aloof persons create their own remarkable and quite unique world, in little and work termite-like in their particular medium. Thus, I made no bones about my intention to examine this specimen of one-track intellect under a magnifying glass during the 12-day journey to Rio. "You'll be out of luck," my friend warned me. "So far as I know, nobody has succeeded in extracting the least bit of psychological material from Czentovic. Underneath all his abysmal limitations, this sly farmhand conceals the wisdom not to expose himself. The procedure is simple, except with such compatriots of his own sphere as he contrives to meet in ordinary taverns. He avoids all conversation. When he senses a person of culture, he retreats into his shell. That's why nobody can plume himself on having heard him say something stupid, or on having sounded the presumably bottomless depths of his ignorance. As a matter of fact, my friend was right. It proved utterly impossible to approach Czentovic during the first few days of the voyage, unless by intruding rudely, which of course isn't my way. He did sometimes appear on the promenade deck, but then always with hands clasped behind his back in a posture of dignified self-absorption, like Napoleon in the familiar painting. And, at that, those peripatetic exhibitions were carried off in such haste and so jerkily that to gain one's end, one would have had to trot after him. The lounges, the bar, the smoking room, Czentovic saw nothing of him. A steward, of whom I made confidential inquiries, revealed that he spent the greater part of the day in his cabin, with a large chessboard on which he recapitulated games or worked out new problems. After 3 days, it angered me to think that his defense tactics were more effective than my will to approach him. I had never before had a chance to know a great chess player personally, and the more I now sought to familiarize myself with the type, the more incomprehensible seemed a lifelong brain activity that rotated exclusively about a space composed of 64 black and white squares. I was well aware, from my own experience, of the mysterious attraction of the royal game, which among all games contrived by man rises superior to the tyranny of chance, and bestows its palm only on mental attainment, or rather, on a definite form of mental endowment. But is it not an offensively narrow construction to call chess a game? Is it not a science, a technique, an art that sways among these categories as Muhammad's coffin does between heaven and earth? At once a union of all contradictory concepts, primeval yet ever new, mechanical in operation yet effective only through the imagination, bounded in geometric space, though boundless in its combinations, ever developing yet sterile, thought that leads to nothing. mathematics that produce no result, art without works, architecture without substance, and nevertheless, as proved by evidence, more lasting in its being and presence than all books and achievements. The only game that belongs to all peoples and all ages, of which none knows the divinity that bestowed it on the world, to slay boredom, to sharpen the senses, to exhilarate the spirit. One searches for its beginning and for its end. Children can learn its simple rules. Duffers succumb to its temptation. Yet within this immutable, tight square, it creates a particular species of master not to be compared with any. Persons destined for chess alone, specific geniuses, in whom vision, patience, and technique are operative through a distribution no less precisely ordained than in mathematicians, poets, composers, but merely united on a different level. In the heyday of physiognomical research, a Gaul would perhaps have dissected the brains of such masters of chess to establish whether a particular coil in the gray matter of the brain, a sort of chess muscle or chess bump, was more conspicuously developed than in other skulls. How a physiognomist would have been fascinated by the case of a Czentovic, where that which is genius appears interstratified with an absolute inertia of the intellect, like a single vein of gold in a ton of dead rock. It stands to reason that so unusual a game, one touched with genius, must create out of itself fitting matadors. This I always knew. But what was difficult and almost impossible to conceive of was the life of a mentally alert person whose world contracts to a narrow, black and white, one-way street, who seeks ultimate triumphs in the to and fro, forward and backward movement of 32 pieces, a being who, by a new opening in which the knight is preferred to the pawn, apprehends greatness and the immortality that goes with casual mention in a chess handbook, of a man of spirit who, escaping madness, can unremittingly devote all of his mental energy during 10, 20, 30, 40 years to the ludicrous effort to corner a wooden king on a wooden board. And here, for the first time, one of these phenomena, one of these singular geniuses, or shall I say puzzling fools, was close to me, 6 cabins distant, and I, unfortunate, for whom curiosity about mental problems manifested itself in a kind of passion, seemed unable to effect my purpose. I conjured up the absurdest ruses. Should I tickle his vanity by the offer of an interview in an important paper, or engage his greed by proposing a lucrative exhibition tour of Scotland? Finally, it occurred to me that the hunter's never-failing practice is to lure the woodcock by imitating its mating cry. So what more successful way was there of attracting a chess master's attention to myself than by playing chess? At no time had I ever permitted chess to absorb me seriously, for the simple reason that it meant nothing to me but a pastime. If I spend an hour at the board, it is not because I want to subject myself to a strain, but, on the contrary, to relieve mental tension. I play at chess in the literal sense of the word, whereas to real devotees it is serious business. Chess, like love, cannot be played alone, and up to that time I had no idea whether there were other chess lovers on board. In order to attract them from their lairs, I set a primitive trap in the smoking room, in that my wife, whose game is even weaker than mine, and I sat at a chessboard as a decoy. Sure enough, we had made no more than 6 moves before one passerby stopped, another asked permission to watch, and before long, the desired partner materialized. MacIver was his name, a Scottish foundation engineer who, I learned, had made a large fortune, boring for oil in California. He was a robust specimen, with an almost square jaw and strong teeth, and a rich complexion, pronouncedly rubicund, as a result, at least in part surely, of copious indulgence in whiskey. His conspicuously broad, almost vehemently athletic shoulders made themselves unpleasantly noticeable in his game. For this MacIver typified those self-important worshippers of success who regard defeat in even a harmless contest as a blow to their self-esteem. Accustomed to achieving his ends ruthlessly and spoiled by material success, this massive self-made man was so thoroughly saturated with his sense of superiority that opposition of any kind became undue resistance, if not an insult. After losing the first round, he sulked and began to explain in detail and dictatorially that it would not have happened but for a momentary oversight. In the third, he ascribed his failure to the noise in the adjoining room. Never would he lose a game without at once demanding revenge. This ambitious crabbedness amused me at first, but as time went on, I accepted it as the unavoidable accompaniment to my real purpose: to tempt the master to our table. By the third day, it worked, but only halfway. It may be that Czentovic observed us at the chessboard through a window from the promenade deck, or that he just happened to be honoring the smoking room with his presence. Anyway, as soon as he perceived us interlopers toying with the tools of his trade, he involuntarily stepped a little nearer, and keeping a deliberate distance, cast a searching glance at our board. It was MacIver's move. This one move was sufficient to apprise Czentovic how little a further pursuit of our dilettantish striving was worthy of his expert interest. With the same matter-of-course gesture with which one of us disposes of a poor detective story that has been proffered in a library without even thumbing its pages, he turned away from our table and left the room. Weighed in the balance and found wanting, I thought, slightly stung by the cool, contemptuous look. And to give vent to my ill humor in some fashion, I said to MacIver, "Your move didn't seem to impress the master." "Which master?" I told him that the man who had just walked by, after glancing disapprovingly at our game, was Czentovic, international chess champion. I added that we would be able to survive it without taking his contempt too greatly to heart. The poor have to cook with water. But to my astonishment, these idle words of mine produced quite an unexpected result. Immediately, he became excited, forgot our game, and his ambition took to an almost audible throbbing. He had no notion that Czentovic was on board. Czentovic simply had to give him a game. The only time he had ever played with a champion was in a multiple game, when he was one of 40. Even that was fearfully exciting, and he had come quite near winning. Did I know the champion personally? I didn't. Would I not invite him to join us? I declined on the ground that I was aware of Czentovic's reluctance to make new acquaintances. Besides, what charm would intercourse with third-rate players hold for a champion? It would have been just as well not to say that about third-rate players to a man of MacIver's brand of conceit. Annoyed, he leaned back and declared gruffly that, as for himself, he couldn't believe that Czentovic would decline a gentleman's courteous challenge. He'd see to that. Upon getting a brief description of the master's person, he stormed out, indifferent to our unfinished game, uncontrollably impatient to intercept Czentovic on the deck. Again, I sensed that there was no holding the possessor of such broad shoulders once his will was involved in an undertaking. I waited, somewhat tensed. Some 10 minutes elapsed, and MacIver returned. Not in too good humor, it seemed to me. "Well?" I asked. "You were right," he answered, a bit annoyed. "Not a very pleasant gentleman." I introduced myself and told him who I am. He didn't even put out his hand. I tried to make him understand that all of us on board would be proud and honored if he'd play the lot of us. But he was cursed stiff-necked about it, said he was sorry, but his contract obligations to his agent definitely precluded any game during his entire tour, except for a fee. And his minimum is $250 per game. I had to laugh. The thought would never have come to me that one could make so much money by pushing figures from black squares to white ones. Well, I hope you took leave of him with courtesy equal to his. MacIver, however, remained perfectly serious. The match is to come off at 3 tomorrow afternoon, here in the smoking room. I hope he won't make mincemeat of us easily. What? You promised him the $250? I cried, quite taken aback. Why not? It's his business. If I had a toothache and there happened to be a dentist aboard, I wouldn't expect him to extract my tooth for nothing. The man's right to ask a fat price. In every line, the big shots are the best traders. So far as I'm concerned, the less complicated the business, the better. I'd rather pay in cash than have your Mr. Czentovic do me a favor. And in the end, have to say thank you. Anyway, many an evening at the club has cost me more than $250 without giving me a chance to play a world champion. It's no disgrace for a third-rate player to be beaten by a Czentovic. It amused me to note how deeply I had injured MacIver's self-love with that third rate. But as he was disposed to foot the bill, it was not for me to remark on his wounded ambition, which promised at last to afford me an acquaintance with my odd fish. Promptly, we notified the 4 or 5 others who had revealed themselves as chess players of the approaching event, and reserved not only our own table, but the adjacent ones, so that we might suffer the least possible disturbance from passengers strolling by. Next day, all our group was assembled at the appointed hour. The center seat, opposite that of the master, was allotted to MacIver as a matter of course. His nervousness found outlet in the smoking of strong cigars, one after another, and in restlessly glancing, ever and again, at the clock. The champion let us wait a good 10 minutes. My friend's tale prompted the surmise that something like this would happen, thus heightening the impressiveness of his entry. He approached the table calmly and imperturbably. He offered no greeting. "You know who I am, and I am not interested in who you are," was what his discourtesy seemed to imply. But he began, in a dry, businesslike way, to lay down the conditions. Since there were not enough boards on the ship for separate games, he proposed that we should play against him collectively. After each of his moves, he would retire to the end of the room so that his presence might not affect our consultations. As soon as our counter move had been made, we were to strike a glass with a spoon. No table bell being available. He proposed, if it pleased us, 10 minutes as the maximum time for each move. Like timid pupils, we accepted every suggestion unquestioningly. Czentovic drew black at the choice of colors. While still standing, he made the first counter move, then turned at once to go to the designated waiting place, where he reclined lazily while carelessly examining an illustrated magazine. There is little point in reporting the game. It ended, as it could not but end, in our complete defeat, and by the 24th move at that. There was nothing particularly astonishing about an international champion wiping off half a dozen mediocre or sub-mediocre players with his left hand. What did disgust us, though, was the lordly manner with which Czentovic caused us to feel, all too plainly, that it was with his left hand that we had been disposed of. Each time, he would give a quick, seemingly careless look at the board, and would look indolently past us, as if we ourselves were dead wooden figures. And this impertinent proceeding reminded one irresistibly of the way one throws a mangy dog a morsel without taking the trouble to look at him. According to my way of thinking, if he had any sensitivity, he might have shown us our mistakes or cheered us up with a friendly word. Even at the conclusion, This subhuman chess automaton uttered no syllable, but, after saying mate, stood motionless at the table, waiting to ascertain whether another game was desired. I had already risen with the thought of indicating, by a gesture, helpless as one always remains in the face of thick-skinned rudeness, that as far as I was concerned, the pleasure of our acquaintance was ended, now that the dollars and cents part of it was over. When, to my anger, MacIver, next to me, spoke up hoarsely, "Revanche!" The note of challenge startled me. MacIver, at this moment, seemed much more like a pugilist about to put up his fists than a polite gentleman. Whether it was Czentovic's disagreeable treatment of us that affected him, or merely MacIver's own pathological, irritable ambition, suffice it that the latter had undergone a complete change. Red in the face up to his hair, his nostrils taut from inner pressure, he breathed hard, and a sharp fold separated the bitten lips from his belligerently projected jaw. I recognized with disquiet that flicker of the eyes that connotes uncontrollable passion, such as seizes players at roulette when the right color fails to come after the sixth or seventh successively doubled stake. Instantly I knew that this fanatical climber would, even at the cost of his entire fortune, play against Czentovic and play and play and play, for simple or doubled stakes, until he won at least a single game. If Czentovic stuck to it, MacIver would prove a gold mine that would yield him a nice few thousands by the time Buenos Aires came in sight. Czentovic remained unmoved. "If you please," he responded politely, "you gentlemen will take black this time." There was nothing different about the second game, except that our group became larger because of a few added onlookers, and livelier too. MacIver stared fixedly at the board, as if he willed to magnetize the chessmen to victory. I sensed that he would have paid $1,000 with delight if he could but shout, "Mate," at our cold-shouldered adversary. Oddly enough, something of his sullen excitement entered unconsciously into all of us. Every single move was discussed with greater emotion than before. Always we would wrangle up to the last moment before agreeing to signal Czentovic to return to the table. We had come to the 17th move, and, to our own surprise, entered on a combination which seemed staggeringly advantageous, because we had been enabled to advance a pawn to the last square but one. We needed but to move it forward to the square C1 to win a second queen. Not that we felt too comfortable about so obvious an opportunity. We were united in suspecting that the advantage which we seemed to have wrested could be no more than bait dangled by Czentovic, whose vision enabled him to view the situation from a distance of several moves. Yet, in spite of common examination and discussion, we were unable to explain it as a feint. At last, at the limit of our 10 minutes, we decided to risk the move. MacIver's fingers were on the pawn to move it to the last square, when he felt his arm gripped and heard a voice, low and impetuous, whisper, "For God's sake, don't!" Involuntarily, we all turned about. I recognized in the man of some 45 years who must have joined the group during the last few minutes in which we were absorbed in the problem before us, one whose narrow, sharp face had already arrested my attention on deck strolls because of its extraordinary, almost chalky pallor. Conscious of our gaze, he continued rapidly, "If you make a queen, he will immediately attack with the bishop. Then you'll take it with your knight. Meantime, however, he moves his pawn to D7, threatens your rook. And even if you check with the knight, you're lost and will be wiped out in 9 or 10 moves. It's practically the constellation that Alekin introduced when he played Bogoljubov in 1922 at the championship tournament at Pistani. Astonished, MacIver released the pawn and, like the rest of us, stared amazedly at the man who had descended in our midst like a rescuing angel. Anyone who can reckon a mate 9 moves ahead must necessarily be a first-class expert, perhaps even a contestant now on his way to the tournament to seize the championship, so that his sudden presence, his thrust into the game at precisely the critical moment, partook almost of the supernatural. MacIver was the first to collect himself. "What do you advise?" he asked suppressedly. "Don't advance yet. Rather, a policy of evasion. First of all, get the king out of the danger line, from G8 to H7. Then he'll probably transfer his attack to the other flank. Then you parry that with the rook, C8 to C4. 2 moves, and he will have lost not only a pawn, but his superiority. And if you maintain your defensive properly, you may be able to make it a draw. That's the best you can get out of it." We gasped, amazed. The precision, no less than the rapidity of his calculations, dizzied us. It was as if he had been reading the moves from a printed page. For all that, this unsuspected turn, by which, thanks to his cutting in, the contest with a world champion promised a draw, worked wonders. Animated by a single thought, we moved aside, so as not to obstruct his observation of the board. Again, MacIver inquired, "The king, then, to H7? Surely the main thing is to duck." MacIver obeyed, and we rapped on the glass. Czentovic came forward at his habitual even pace. His eyes swept the board and took in the counter-move. Then he moved the pawn, H2 to H4 on the king's flank, exactly as our unknown aide had predicted. Already the latter was whispering excitedly, "The rook forward, the rook to C4. Then he'll first have to cover the pawn. That won't help him, though. Don't bother about his pawns, but attack with the knight, C3 to D5, and the balance is again restored. Press the offensive instead of defending." We had no idea of what he meant. He might have been talking Chinese. But once under his spell, MacIver did as he had been bidden. Again we struck the glass to recall Czentovic. This was the first time that he made no quick decision. Instead, he looked fixedly at the board. His eyebrows contracted involuntarily. Then he made his move, the one which our stranger had said he would, and turned to go. Yet, before he started off, something novel and unexpected happened. Czentovic raised his eyes and surveyed our ranks. Plainly, he wanted to ascertain who it was that offered such unaccustomed, energetic resistance. From this moment, our excitement grew immeasurably. Thus far, we had played without genuine hope. But now, every pulse beat hotly at the thought of breaking Czentovic's cold disdain. Without loss of time, our new friend had directed the next move, and we were ready to call Czentovic back. My fingers trembled as I hit the spoon against the glass. And now, we registered our first triumph. Czentovic, who hitherto had executed his purpose standing, hesitated, and, finally, sat down. He did this slowly and heavily, but that was enough to cancel, in a physical sense, if in no other, the difference in levels that had previously obtained. We had necessitated his acknowledgement of equality, spatially at least. He cogitated long, his eyes resting immovably on the board, so that one could scarcely discern the pupils under the heavy lids. And under the strained application, his mouth opened gradually, which gave him a rather foolish look. Czentovic reflected for some minutes, then made a move and rose. At once, our friend said, half audibly, "A stall! Well thought out, but don't yield to it. Force an exchange. He's got to exchange. Then we'll get a draw, and not even the gods can help him."